Let's have a conversation this afternoon about this topic. The most beautiful state of the mind and heart. It is, in fact, a text. It is a text by an author named Sri Ram, through which we will explore some ideas. Naturally, I will not be working with the entirety of this text. Our intention, within the context of Philosophy Day, was to address physical health, then a bit of psychological health, all from the perspective of philosophy, of course. Later, our national director will work more on aspects of inner life, elements that are, I would say, more internal and oriented toward philosophy. However, all three lectures share common points, of course. So, we will talk about quality of life from a mental and emotional perspective, and it is clear that the three lectures are interconnected. So, the idea is to talk a little about quality of life. Today, it is a very common topic, addressed in various fields and in many different ways. Sometimes, when I see the focus, at times excessive, that has been placed on this topic, I stop to reflect. I don't know if you have ever noticed this, but often what is being discussed is not quality, but quantity. Well, when we talk about living at higher standards, the focus is only on quantity. A greater quantity of possessions, a greater quantity of recognition, a greater quantity of love, whatever it may be, quantity, quantity, quantity. But is it really true that when we have all this quantity, it will eventually lead to quality? Will it produce the outcome we are hoping for? That is the question I would like to raise with you today in this brief conversation. What do we want from life? An interesting question. Let's imagine this little boat. What do we want from life means. Do I truly know? Have I ever asked myself this question? Do I have a clear and defined understanding of my life's purpose, where I want to go with all of this? Or have I delegated that responsibility to someone else to think about for me? Is it clear to me what the purpose is, where I want to arrive? And this purpose, if I have actually defined one, of course, is it truly connected to what I want to be, or what I want to do, or what I want to have? These things are part of it, but they are not everything. It is as if you imagine asking the owner of this little boat, "What do you want from life?" "Well, I want to have a better boat than this one." You might say, "Well, that's just a means of transportation. Where do you want to go with that boat?" He replies, "I haven't thought about that. No, I only thought about the boat." Isn't that curious? Wouldn't you think, at the very least, that this person is a bit disconnected from reality? Because he focuses on the means and not on the ends. And many times, we would end up doing more or less the same thing as this disconnected boat owner. Well, I want to have many means, but where do I want to go with all of this? Why do I need all these means? Are they truly necessary to build the goal I want to reach? To arrive at the port I long for, do I really need this boat I dream of?
What port is that?
Many times, we delegate that choice to others. This is one of the most unsettling questions in philosophy. Where do I want to go? It seems that everything is somewhat standardized, and we run along tracks that have been laid out since we were born, telling us where all human beings should go, what they should desire, even what they should dream of. And we do not stop to question, is this really what I want? Is this truly what would give my life meaning? In other words, we are here to reflect, to stir some inner questions, and perhaps leave this space with clues that bring us closer to an answer. The happiness package. It is not hard to imagine what is considered today as the minimum and maximum happiness package. There is even a framework you may have heard of called Maslow's pyramid. It speaks about needs ranging from the most basic to the highest, in quotes, the most sophisticated. So, what would the minimum happiness package be? A life of survival with comfort and security. Isn't that right? Well, I survive, and I have everything I need to live well. A good home, I have health, I have a family that also has these things: health, economic stability, and safety. This is the minimum happiness package. In general, people are not satisfied with just that. They would like to have more. That is, when the maximum happiness package comes in. And what would that be? Look how content and euphoric this little one is. It has reached the maximum happiness package. The maximum happiness package is having much more of everything you already had. So, if I already had a house, now it is a bigger house. If I already had comfort, then more comfort. If I already had pleasures, then more pleasures. If I already had, I don't know, fun, then more fun. And how does that end? Generally speaking, the people who reach the maximum happiness package, which, as we will see, are not that many, how do they end up? Do they truly have quality of life? Do they feel fulfilled? It is interesting for us to look at society, the people around us, and reflect a bit philosophically on what people have been seeking and what they have actually found in life, not with the intent to criticize, but perhaps with the aim of discovering our own paths and understanding whether this is truly what we want. The people who attain this happiness package, very often, when they achieve it, you notice that they are not truly happy. If we take a look at first world countries, where there is a very high level of social prosperity, a high level of social rights, a very high standard of consumption, you may know that it is also in these countries where we see high rates, for example, of youth and child suicide, of people suffering from depression and, at times, lacking a sense of purpose in life, and that makes us stop and reflect. Perhaps the fact that we don't have all these material possessions, the ones we dream about, in a certain way protects us, because we believe we are unhappy because we lack them. We think that if we had them, we would be happy. But what if you had them and still were not happy? Can you imagine the anguish, the emptiness, the disillusionment, and then what? What is missing? Society does not have answers for that. That is considered a kind of dysfunction. And by thinking of it as a dysfunction for so long, sometimes it actually becomes one. So, this ultimate happiness package, when it is achieved, often ends in a certain emptiness that doesn't fulfill, that doesn't bring the quality of life we seek. And when it is not achieved, which is the case for most people, when we don't achieve it, then things get a bit complicated, don't they? Then comes the storm, frustration, unhappiness, an endless projection of what we felt we deserved, what we wanted but never had. And how is that resolved? Through fantasy. We will have a slide ahead dedicated just to discussing this. In other words, it is a way of simulating what we would have liked to experience in an imaginary realm where everything is possible. And this is heavily influenced by society. So, all this frustration arises, along with a tendency toward fantasy. Thus, following this path, which society presents to us as the definition of quality of life and human fulfillment, you are left with two alternatives. Who is achieving it? In what condition? And those who are not achieving it, which is the majority, how are they doing? Well, let's take a deeper look. And these answers that society offers me, are they truly valid? Could there be other possibilities? Might there be other ways for us to find fulfillment, to experience quality in life? In general, one of the greatest fallacies that exists, you have probably heard of it, is the so-called fallacy of the excluded middle. It is one of the most well-known in logic. It is the kind of reasoning that says, love it or leave it. So, is there really no third possibility? Really? In other words, there are many other possibilities, but this fallacy, which we often practice within society, only presents this binary choice. Either you achieve this specific form of success, or you don't. But what about other forms of success? Do they not exist? Is there truly no other possibility beyond this duality? Well, let's reflect on that for a moment. The solution? To fly. Colorful and individual balloons offered to everyone simple. Easily obtained, this is the cultural induction into fantasy. Fantasy is a very curious thing. Imagination is a virtue, fantasy is a vice. Imagination projects something you will bring to life in the future. Fantasy fulfills itself and replaces reality. So, it creates a small, colorful balloon, easy, and often socially induced. Do you realize that our generation is one of the most distracted we have ever known in history? One of the most evasive. It is striking how people, especially the newer generations, the young people coming up, this is very noticeable, how they tend to be scattered, with difficulty concentrating. The addiction to fantasy tends to, when we want to hold on to reality, sometimes we can't. It leads to escapism, to diversions, and truly becomes an addiction. Why is that? Imagine this, I want to become a great pianist. Becoming a great pianist is not easy at all. Anyone who has someone studying piano at home knows how demanding it is, both for the person practicing and for everyone else living in the same house. Isn't that right? And this goes on for years, from what I have seen, because there is a case like that in my own home. In other words, it is a sacrifice. It is not easy. Well, I close my eyes and, in that moment, I am a great concert pianist. People give me a standing ovation. I find fulfillment in that. That replaces reality. And what is most curious is when this starts to be socially encouraged. If you take a moment to do a simple math calculation, which is quite common and often discussed and talked about even today, you will notice that what is presented as happiness, as fulfillment, as quality of life nowadays is the consumption pattern of an average North American man. This has become globalized. In all four corners of the world, everyone dreams of being like that. A consumption pattern that reflects at least the minimum of what an average North American man consumes. We know that if 7 billion human beings consumed at that level, the planet wouldn't last 10 years. In other words, it is mathematically unfeasible. Therefore, it is not going to happen. So, we are condemned to dream of something that, in most cases, is unattainable. Where are we headed? Toward fantasy. And that path is already lit and marked, even culturally encouraged. A whole range of elements contribute to making this fantasy something that is often even shared. Now, I will tell you a story that perhaps you have experienced something similar. A shared fantasy. One fine day, I arrived at my workplace. For those who don't know, New Acropolis is a volunteer-based organization, so all of us who are teachers here are not paid, we are professionals elsewhere. And when I arrived at my workplace, there was a small group looking very distressed. They were talking of a problem that had happened to someone. I don't remember the person's name, but they said, "Did you see what happened to so-and-so? How sad. What is she going to do now?" And I became concerned about it. I thought, well, if it is someone in need of help, let me go and offer my support. What happened? Who is this person you're talking about? Oh, but you are so out of touch. It is the heroine from the primetime soap opera. Didn't you see what happened to her? No, I didn't. Ah, you live in another world. Fortunately. But I found it curious, the intensity of emotion that situation was stirring up. The vividness of the suffering those people were expressing. It felt like something real. In other words, it seemed like a collectively induced and contagious fantasy. And the whole group experiences it, savors it as if it were reality. A substitution for reality, which often leads to another curious phenomenon. You have probably experienced this. Every time we go online, it is hard to avoid ending up on something like MSN, and in the corner, there is that column, celebrity gossip. It's curious, isn't it? It is so interesting. People are so curious to know what others are doing. They are no longer very curious about who others truly are. And worse, sometimes they are not even curious to know who they themselves are. People, in general, are very eager to check your Facebook and see what you have been up to. But who are you? What are your dreams? Where do you want to go with all of this? No one seems very interested in that. Therefore, our inner self is not part of the realm of fame. It is, generally, completely anonymous, even to ourselves. In the end, this fantasy becomes the escape when that standard of quality of life is not achieved. We flee into a colorful, selfish, individual balloon, completely illusory. A happy human being. Generally, this is the person who is envied within society. They are famous, attractive, wealthy, and loved by everyone. A very questionable idea, isn't it? We realize that sometimes these people, or rather, not just sometimes, almost always, we can find examples from the past and very close ones in the present. That in fact, these people are not exactly loved, they are consumed like any other consumer product. No one is truly interested in knowing who they really are. They set trends, become part of mass culture, and are consumed and discarded, sometimes cruelly. So we will see examples from distant history, like Marilyn Monroe, to more recent ones, like Michael Jackson, Amy Winehouse, and so on. How many of them? How many of them are consumed with a costume of public adoration and are then cast aside? Are these people really that happy? Those who reach these social standards of fame, beauty, and sometimes wealth, are they truly that loved? Do they really find what they are looking for? It is questionable. And we will see this happening time and time again. The other day, I came across a recently published book in a bookstore. It was none other than the Diary of Marilyn Monroe. You might wonder what on earth made me want to flip through it. A Diary of Marilyn Monroe. I found it intriguing, so I decided to see what new insights there might be about Marilyn Monroe at this point in time. And, interestingly, I stumbled upon a page where she, in anguish, said exactly this. No one is even remotely interested in knowing who I really am, and maybe not even I am. That statement struck me deeply. I found it so painful. No one is even remotely interested in knowing who I really am, and maybe not even I am. These are the famous figures. From MSN. Questioning our dreams. If we stop to ask ourselves, do we really want these things? And if we do, what exactly do we want from them? Because it might be true that we will see something in them, that there is something appealing, but what is it? Do these things truly have something to offer us in terms of fulfillment, quality of life? What are we really seeking through them? By them, I mean beauty, fame, wealth, and love. Do we want these things? Well, maybe we do, but what exactly do we want? What can they truly offer us? Is it that quality of life we dream about? Let's take a moment to question this. Let's begin, first of all, with beauty. In general, considering a more or less superficial perspective, what people usually understand as having beauty is having physical beauty. This is something everyone seeks, everyone pursues. In general, not absolutely everyone, but the vast majority go to the limits of their means to attain this physical beauty. And yet, it is lost, inevitably. There is not much possibility of holding back nature. The rose, beautiful and splendid, dies tomorrow. In other words, matter does not retain beauty, and no matter how much we do for it, it fades away. So, generally, this leads to frustration. We can observe those who are famous for their beauty, how they age, how difficult it is for them to grow old, how hard it is to accept this inexorable law of nature. Neither they nor their general audience are willing to accept it. Well, when the vessels wear out, that is, when appearances fade, what remains of that beauty so fervently pursued? Can beauty be preserved? In some way, traditional philosophers say that it can. It can be preserved if you seek beauty on more enduring planes. Plato has something well known called the path of Eros, where he said that by pursuing beauty, a person can reach the divine. Have you ever heard about this? He explains that, generally, people chase after beautiful bodies. Then they realize that beautiful bodies do not retain beauty for long. Beauty fades very quickly. It disappears. But they realize that there is something beyond physical appearance in people who are sometimes very beautiful. If a person is just, honorable, fraternal, generous, someone truly generous, truly altruistic, that is something deeply beautiful. That kind of beauty can last a lifetime. Some traditions even say it goes beyond that. This is a kind of beauty that is much more enduring. Therefore, a person begins to pursue this beauty. And there comes a certain moment when they begin to ask where all these forms of beauty draw their inspiration from. They turn toward the ideal of beauty, toward the metaphysical, toward God. If we become aware of this ability to seek beauty on more subtle levels, we have invested very little in this. We invest a lot in the body, but very little in the beauty of the soul. This has not, in general, been our primary concern. We don't have well-attended moral beauty salons. Isn't that right? We have sought very little. And notice how curious this is. Because even for the most materialistic individuals, this has physical effects. It does. Anyone with even a slightly symbolic perspective, which is said to be the refinement of the human mind, anyone with a hint of symbolic vision can look at someone and immediately sense, for example, if that person is lazy or has bad intentions. Even in cartoons, right from the beginning, they use facial expressions that immediately let you know who is the good guy, the villain, the lazy one, or the funny one. Isn't that true? Disney is a master at this. It reflects reality to some extent. Someone with a more symbolic outlook can clearly perceive who possesses qualities and virtues and who does not, because these things manifest outwardly. This is the myth of Pinocchio, the fairy tale of Pinocchio, which carries deep symbolic meaning. Our flaws deform us, while our virtues make us beautiful. And someone who sees beyond the surface layer of the skin will look and recognize that. But materialistic and superficial people see nothing. They don't see, but is that really the kind of person you want to admire you? Wow, what a need for validation. Are those really the people you want to admire you? The most superficial ones? Or those who have a bit more depth? Those who are capable of seeing deeper truths through parallels. They are profound. They see with greater depth. What kind of human being do you want to find you beautiful? These are also things worth reflecting on. So, we need to think about what we want from beauty, and, in fact, what kind of beauty we seek, and even what kind of person we want to find us beautiful, right? Well, what else? Let's talk about wealth. This question of wealth is quite intriguing. Imagine I don't own a car. I buy a car, what a joy. My quality of life improves, no doubt about it. I buy a second one. Well, if there is another person in the house, they can use one, I will use the other. My quality of life improves. Then I buy a third, a fourth, a fifth car. Does that still improve my quality of life? What will I do with all these cars? Am I going to use a different one each day to match the color of my clothes? Do you realize that there comes a point when it no longer improves anything? Well, I have a small one-bedroom house. I can't host a guest. Then I get 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 10 bedrooms. At some point, it no longer improves anything. I don't use more than 1 bedroom. It does not improve my quality of life at all. This has been mathematically proven through research that has already been conducted. An increase in the sense of well-being, an increase in possessions. There is an upward curve in the beginning. When you start from nothing and begin to acquire your first material goods, there is a sharp rise. Then it levels off. Do you know what happens at a certain point, folks? It starts to decline. How curious, right? It is clear, people begin to realize that society offers no alternative other than having. And they have, and yet they no longer feel fulfilled. They see no quality in life. This begins to generate frustration. Instead of gaining satisfaction, they lose it. Instead of gaining quality of life, they lose it. And it seems this becomes more and more progressive as age advances. And as the natural existential anxieties of that stage of life begin to emerge. I always mention this in my lectures, almost all of them, because I find it very meaningful, a study once conducted by a psychiatrist and thanatologist who worked with terminally ill patients. That is what a thanatologist does. After 30 years in the profession, she said, the more materialistic a person is, the less likely they are to remain lucid in the face of death. Because they realize that everything they invested their life in, they are going to lose it all. And they are left empty-handed. It is too late to reverse that. So, a terrible existential anguish sets in. Awareness comes by contrast, by the traditional Eastern theory of impact. It is through contrast, between one color and another, between black and white, that I come to understand what white is and what black is. If the entire universe were white, I would have no awareness of white. In the contrast between life and death, I come to understand what life is. And perhaps I also begin to understand what death is. And then I realize that everything I had might not have been exactly what I truly wanted. Too late. It becomes inconsistent at a moment when there may no longer be any choices left. So, this wealth is curious because it begins to decline after a certain point. And it fades away until it reaches a null point. So, it does not keep growing. Satisfaction, the quality of life, does not grow boundlessly as wealth increases. Contrary to what we tend to believe. Well, and this person who has so much wealth, does he truly possess himself? You liked that, didn't you? Take a look here. What a peaceful sleep of the just. Does he truly possess himself, I wonder? That too is a form of wealth, perhaps the greatest of all. Look, I have my doubts. I own my car, which is parked right outside. When I want to drive it in a certain direction, I do. When I want to fuel it, when I want to do maintenance, I do it. It obeys my commands. I take it wherever I want. I own my vehicle, my car, which is out there. But do I truly possess myself? Am I able, for instance, to control my fluctuations of anger, rage, sadness, and depression? Can I control those circular mental patterns that won't let me find peace? When I want to concentrate, sometimes that thought keeps spinning in my mind, sometimes for days on end, with the same circular mental pattern. When I say stop, does it stop? No, that's when it spins even more. Am I able to control my emotional states, which are like a roller coaster, constantly up and down? I cannot. Therefore, I have much more control over my car outside than I do over myself. So, am I truly the master of myself? And observe that. When you have material possessions, things, and the quantity increases, the line of satisfaction declines. But when a person possesses themselves, does that line of satisfaction decline? Today, I have more command over my mental patterns than I did yesterday. I am able to concentrate and think about what I have consciously chosen to think about. I am able to keep my emotions stable. I do not swing back and forth between euphoria and depression. I hold the reins of my attention, my concentration, my imagination. As this increases, does satisfaction decline? Does quality of life decrease? Or does it continue to grow? In other words, this kind of possession does not decline. It only ascends. It is guaranteed. But even so, we do not seek it. Isn't that interesting? It is a possession that has no side effects, no cause for regret. And yet, it is not our priority to possess oneself. Continuing. Fame. Wanting to project oneself above others, just like this cat. Because you have fame. Because someone who doesn't have it is down there looking up at you. I always joke with my students and say the following. Imagine you go to your mother and say, "Mom, I won in first place in a competition, in a sports contest or something like that," and she says, "That's great, my child. How many people placed in first?" 1,000,000. All the candidates came in first place. Her satisfaction is gone, right? She will even seem apathetic, like, "Oh, is that so, my child?" 2. In our society's standard of fame, someone has to have failed. For your victory or fame, your success to have meaning, you see? You have to win over someone, not win with someone. That is no fun at all. And then you come to talk to me about fraternity. What kind of fraternity is that under these terms? Notice how we encounter some very curious contradictions in the way we think about life. Our standard of happiness is like that of the little cat, always over someone else. And what is it, really, that we're seeking when we dream of fame? In general, at least what I believe, this is my theory, and it might be wrong, I think we will see to stand out from the crowd. We want, in some way, to set ourselves apart. There is something within us suffocating, gasping for air, from having to conform to a pattern so identical to everyone else. But have those who achieve fame really stepped out of the crowd? Quite the opposite. They created the standards of the crowd. They are the model for the masses. And they often die in anonymity, as we mentioned just a moment ago. Not only to the public, but even to themselves. Strangers to themselves. They perfectly embody the standard of the masses. They did not rise above the crowd. I believe it is legitimate because, in truth, this isn't a pursuit of fame. Deep down, it is a search for individuality, which is a rightful pursuit of the human being. One tries to express themselves in the way society allows, in the way society understands, in the way they were taught to recognize. Is that fame? No, that is identity, that is individuality. That, indeed, brings fulfillment, but it is very different from what we call today social projection or fame. In general, these people are the most massified, and the ones who possess the least identity and individuality. Therefore, perhaps this does not bring us what we are truly seeking. In other words, fame at the cost of not knowing who you are. And, generally, that is exactly how it is. Massification creates a very curious effect. We do not know if our thoughts are truly our own. Most of the time, they are not. We don't know if our feelings are truly our own. Most of the time, they are not. Just ask yourself, why are our responses almost reflexive, automatic? Do you like this thing? No. Then you stop, hit pause, and ask yourself, why not? What life experience did I reflect on? And I came to the conclusion that this thing isn't good. Did I actually experience something like that? No, but I heard someone say it wasn't good, and I just went along with it. Do you like this person? No. In our society, we experience true waves of collective passion and rejection. We like a certain character, and we dislike another. No one stops to ask why. Have I ever done any deep research to truly understand who this person really is? Did I truly choose not to like this because I have principles and it does not align with them? Did I make a conscious choice, or was I just told it was that way? Everyone said so I just went along with the crowd. And then, we are terrified of human cloning. But we are already cloned in every possible way. Because, psychologically, most of our thoughts and feelings aren't even our own. Well, isn't that a sad thing? Are you telling me that most of my feelings, then, aren't truly my own thoughts? That I don't have them? That is actually a great realization. Because that is the moment to begin. A great realization. It is not a bad thing. Philosophically, it is wonderful. Welcome to the real world. Now you have discovered what you don't have. That is a good moment. Let's roll up our sleeves and work to develop it. A real world. In other words, to begin building what is truly your own. The desire to be loved by everyone. Love. Well, love. It is something very legitimate. It is natural for us to want it. But is what we are seeking, and society is really offering love? What is it, really? Is it about being loved or being used, and using others? Because one thing is, Plato spoke often of the three worlds, the physical world, the emotional world, which we call the psychic, and the spiritual world. He said that true love is only real when it is built from the top down. In other words, when we share deep, human affinities, not just psychic or material ones. Because it is not only on a material level that we use one another. It is very common for us to see and even feel a certain disgust. People often use each other physically as a source of pleasure. But we also use each other psychically as a source of comfort, affection, companionship, out of fear of loneliness, to fit into social norms of acceptance, because a good man or a good woman is expected to have a partner and a family. In the end, there are many reasons that show very little regard for the other person, very little regard for oneself. They lack depth and are extremely superficial. This is still a form of using the other. It is just one type or another kind of use. There is physical use, where one uses the other like, I don't know, a chocolate bar, simply savoring the most crude, surface-level aspect. That is vulgar and, generally speaking, we reject it, at least, in most cases, I believe. But the psychological form of use is much more common, it is the norm. We are with the other out of fear of loneliness, out of a need for affection. In other words, it has much more to do with my own needs and deficiencies, rather than a deep understanding of the other's soul and a sincere desire to contribute so that they may truly grow as a human being. The demands of true love are immense. Plato used to say that it must begin from the top down. It starts in the spiritual, in the ideal, where people share great things, dreams. They want to make a difference in the world. They want to become better. They want to help those around them to grow, to be better. They want to be a positive force in each other's lives. They don't simply engage in a transaction. This is something quite remarkable. Let that be understood. He said that horizontal relationships are always very close to commerce. A give and take. I give affection, I receive affection. I offer companionship, I receive companionship. If you give affection and receive nothing in return, you already have a relationship crisis, don't you? If you give a kiss and don't get one back, well, I am wronged, you gave and received nothing. In other words, you can see that there is a very transactional, very horizontal exchange happening there. And he said that true love finds fulfillment in the other's growth. It expects nothing in return. It is generous. It is altruistic. It finds purpose in being a positive force in the lives of those around it, and it connects with people through what is best in them in such a way that, simply by being with them, they grow as human beings. How many of these people do we have in our lives? How many of them? And that is when we arrive at the desert I mentioned to you earlier, culminating in a desert. Because when we look around and realize that we don't have many relationships like that they are difficult to build, and that we didn't even know such a possibility existed, now we do. Well, then I am in a desert. I am the master of my thoughts, but not of my feelings. I haven't built deep bonds of love. I am in a desert. As I said, this can be seen as something negative, but it can also be a starting point. It takes effort, yes, but it is a worthy adventure, a meaningful journey. This is what it means to become human. And this realization is a good one because it is grounded in the real world. It is no longer a fantasy. Even though it may seem desolate, it belongs to the real world. Therefore, it is a good starting point. Whether it is seen as bad or good depends on your perspective. It is like that simple joke people often tell about the pessimist and the optimist. You have probably heard many versions of it. A man arrived and found a pile of construction materials scattered around, a bunch of. He saw the ruins and said, "What a horror, what sadness, what a disaster. They gave me a collapsed building." Then another person came along, saw the same pile of rubble, and said, "How wonderful, how amazing. They gave me land and building materials. I can start right away." In other words, this is someone who sees things in a positive light. You already know where to begin in the real world. This is the real world. We have genuine feelings. Let's see how we can build upon that. Perhaps the standard of living that society offers me is not what I truly want. Let's find out what it is that I really want. And then, let's begin the process of building ourselves, perhaps according to a different standard. Real achievements. It is an adventure, and therefore, it requires a spirit of adventure. And you might say, it doesn't exist. But it does. I assure you, it does. Once, I had an experience that I found very curious. A simple one, but very curious nonetheless. I walked into a video rental store and was chatting with the guy at the counter. And I asked him, I had the idea to ask what genre was rented the most. I was expecting to hear romance, science fiction, something along those lines. Adventure, he said, most of it is adventure. The majority of the titles that get rented are adventure. I found that very curious. Does modern man enjoy adventure? Isn't that curious? Where does he enjoy it? Only on a screen. While he sits comfortably on his little couch, eating popcorn. Deep down, he loves adventure. But he has not developed the ability to realize that it can be lived, not just watched. It can be experienced firsthand, pushing boundaries, growing, becoming more human. All of this is an adventure. At times, quite arduous, sometimes very difficult, but it is interesting because when we're young, teenagers, or even not so young, when we're presented with an adventure, a game, a challenge, we feel excited and motivated. Then comes a certain point when complacency sets in, and when we're faced with an adventure, we feel discouraged and think it is not meant for us. I chose the example of a game precisely so we could reflect a bit on this. Just like in video games, we had a student here at the school recently, Solo, who gave a talk about games, and I borrowed some of his ideas because I found them very interesting. In general, we enjoy games. Why do we enjoy them? Young people and not so young people alike, right, Solo? Why do we enjoy them? Shall we take a moment to reflect on that? He was going to share some reflections that I found very interesting. Clear objectives. When you start a game, what do you have to achieve? You don't know. Figure it out. You are on your own. Right from the beginning, it becomes clear what you need to accomplish. You have to defeat an antagonist. You have to destroy a certain monster. The objective is made clear. From that point on, once the goal is clear, you have an enthusiastic player. Well, life is the same way. The objective must be clear. A person must have a clear ideal in life, one that lies much more in the realm of being than in the realm of having. And the realm of having is wonderful as a means, but it is not enough to justify life. Because if you only live in the realm of having, you reach that point where we just keep having things. And there comes a certain point when it is no longer worth it, it no longer has any meaning or flavor. Having is great as a means. But the purpose must always lie in the realm of being. In other words, what will I build within myself? What kind of mastery will I have over myself? That is fulfillment. That is the harbor for that little boat. When we see this with clarity, historically in philosophy, such people were called idealists. They had an ideal and they loved it. Idealists tend to be very enthusiastic players, deeply excited and highly motivated in life. They know where they want to go. Therefore, all tools become valid. Let's take a closer look at this. Difficulties as challenges. Has anyone ever imagined a game where you just show up, press a button, and win without having to do anything else? How does that make sense? How does that make sense? In fact, this applies to everything, to the entire world of childhood and youth imagination. I remember when my daughter was little, I used to tell her fairy tales. And she already understood that. There came a moment, it was very funny, because she experienced those fairy tales with such tremendous intensity. I would tell her the story of Snow White, and she would say, "That witch, she is so evil. That witch is terrible." And then one time, she just stopped, frozen. She said, "Yeah, right, Mom. But if there were no witch, there wouldn't be a story, dash." I said, "That is true, my daughter. Can you imagine how boring it would be? The prince met the princess, they got married, lived happily ever after. The end of the story." Impossible, no one could stand something like that. It would be so dull. There are difficulties, and they are challenges. Life is like that too. It presents us with trials. So why don't we see these trials as challenges? So that we can rise to higher levels of qualification, because that is how it works in games. You overcome challenges, and that is how you level up. I see kids even competing with each other, asking, "What level have you reached in that game?" "Oh, I've made it to level 3. "Oh, I've gone further. I didn't get that far." In other words, you reach certain levels of skill and performance when you face difficulties and come out victorious. Life works the same way. We reach levels of maturity, self-mastery, and fulfillment when we face difficulties as tests and draw from them the experience needed to respond to life. It truly is just like that. Let's continue. What else do we find in games? We learn how to handle tools. That is also how it is. Each level comes with its own tools. And it seems like they get more complex the higher the level you reach, right? And if you learn to skillfully use the tools in the game and do certain things, your character flies, your character does somersaults, of course you are able to overcome that stage much more easily. What are the tools of the human being? There are many. Willpower, imagination, intelligence, organization, integrity, self-knowledge. All of these are tools. Haven't you read the game manual? Generally, we don't read it. So, within the conditions of the game, we have tools. I always joke with my students about this because nowadays we buy a blender from Arno with 2 speeds. It comes with a manual in 5 languages just to teach you how to click. Isn't that right? But when it comes to human life, no one told us anything. These tools, how do we use them? What are they for? They are meant to help us level up in this game of life. We need to learn how to handle them, to discover the taste of it, because that shifts our sense of fulfillment from having to being. To experience it within myself, to live this adventure, this elevates me to new levels within this great game that is life. In truth, we don't invent things, we copy them. Who was this created and inspired by? Continuing on, what else do we have? We turn to the tutorial. Right? When it is not the tutorial, it is the manual. When it is not the manual, it is those little websites on the internet that tell us how to solve a certain problem. How do I defeat that little monster? Then everyone who has already won posts the instructions there. Isn't that right? It almost sounds like I play, right? It might give that impression. In reality, it would be very difficult to start playing a game without turning to any of those resources. It would be a huge waste of time. I won't read the manual, I will not look at the tutorial, I won't check anything. You'll just learn by trying things out. Well, that would be a huge waste of time. And a margin for error very high. By the time you figure out that has already been written down, read it. You will start with a very solid level of mastery. We could say that the tutorial for life was created through philosophy. All those who wanted to pass on the way they lived because they achieved a good performance, left it recorded. Those who know how to play enjoy teaching. In general, good players are also good teachers. Those who know how to play enjoy teaching. Men who had strong self-mastery, men who were brilliant in terms of imagination, intelligence, organization, love, and self-control. We have many works within what we call the philosophical tradition that serve as a tutorial. Why can't we start from where these men left off? We do this with technology. No one starts from scratch. No one starts building planes when learning aeronautical engineering. Everyone begins from where previous generations left off. So why can't we turn to Live's tutorial? Or do you believe there is nothing to learn from all these men? If they were able to reach high levels in what we call life performance, it was because they were wise, just, and integrous human beings. Why couldn't we learn from them and start from where they left off? Why can't we turn to a tutorial? The entire structure of philosophy is based on this. Carl Jung, said that when we learn from our ancestors, we breathe life into our past, we justify their existence. That is exactly how it is. So, philosophy as a life tutorial is the art of living. It has always been known this way in the classical period. Even though, at that time, they didn't know what a tutorial was, it was still the art of living. Life is also virtual. This is something a bit more complex, but it is something we need to understand. The little character did flips on the screen, did 1,000 things, flew, fought karate. You turn off the screen. What is left of all that? What? The skill you developed within yourself to deal with those things doesn't die when you turn off the screen. Isn't that right? It stays within you. The experience you accumulated, the mastery of elements you gained, the development of skills you nurtured, those stay with you when the screen goes dark. That is real. The game ends. Don't you think life is the same way? Virtual, fleeting. Just look at Plato's allegory of the cave, which has been referenced so many times. For example, the first Matrix movie was nothing more than a cinematic recreation of Plato's cave myth. It illustrates this concept exactly. Reality is highly questionable. According to classical standards, nothing that is fleeting is real, it is transient. It is as if a stage we are set for us to live out an experience. And if all of this is so fleeting, so transient, and so uncertain from the standpoint of reality, what will remain of it all? The skills we develop within ourselves, the human virtues, the process of becoming more human that we undergo. When the screen goes dark, that is what will remain. According to these traditions, perhaps not even death can take that away from us. What we build within ourselves, that is what is real. Welcome, once again, to what is real. This is real. The rest, there comes a certain moment when, who knows by what force of the universe, a button is pressed and the screen turns off. That is not as real as it seems. These are things that are very fleeting, lacking transcendence, so ephemeral, they slip through our fingers. Nothing that truly belongs to you can ever be taken from you. Buddhist tradition. All these external things can be taken from us. But what we build within, no one can take that away. No button can erase it. The construction of the self is a true goal, without a doubt. From the moment we direct our entire life toward that, we can say, the closer I get, the greater my quality of life. This is something internal, something sacred. It leads to a greater ability to respond to life, a deeper sense of fulfillment as a human being. It is something measurable. No one can take it from me. It grows as life goes on, and the more I have, the more I can contribute to the world around me. So it is that example, the old example I often give. When we're going to build a house, the first thing we do is the blueprint. The architect gives us everything carefully drawn out, and on the day the foreman begins work on the site. When he needs to know what to do that day, so he can understand what needs to be done, he looks at the blueprint, he looks at the finished vision of the house. That is how we should be in our own lives as well. It is very logical. If we know where we want to go, we can guide our day, we give it purpose and direction. It is not loose. So, there is no such thing as a wasted day. Lost or boring because I have a project to build. And each day I move forward in the direction of that project, everything makes sense. And I know whether I am growing or declining, whether I am standing still, I have a verifiable standard. I can perceive what is happening in my life because I know where I want to get. I am an idealist. A philosopher is, at heart, an idealist. They have a clear vision of who they want to become, of where they want all of this to lead. And from there, they measure their life, whether they are moving toward that goal, standing still, or heading in the opposite direction. This is measurable. You can know it. You can perceive it. So, the construction of ourselves is a real goal, and perhaps it is a true standard for quality of life, an alternative to the one that society offers. It is said that by having so much quantitatively, we eventually achieve something qualitatively, but in practice, we don't see that happening. That transformation, we don't see it take place. Here, we have quality from the first to the last step, according to these standards, which do not exclude having things, but do not make having them the goal. Each thing becomes more beautiful and fulfilled by being what it truly is. In other words, quality of life is deeply connected to identity. Plants are perfectly fulfilled by doing what corresponds to them within the natural order. Animals, birds, and nature as a whole follow this same principle. Human beings, because they are rational and free, have the choice to either find or ignore their true nature. This is what has traditionally been called choice, or free will. By finding it voluntarily through an act of will, one becomes fulfilled. Because this is fundamental. Each being is fulfilled in what it truly is. Know thyself. Each being finds fulfillment by deeply discovering its own identity. Therefore, a path to fulfillment and happiness for human beings is the human nature. It is the process of becoming human. To understand what human nature truly is. To imagine what it means to be a true human being. In the fullness of the human condition, what would that be? Imagining it is a wonderful exercise of imagination. What would an ideal human being look like, the one I envision? What virtues would they have? What kind of behavior would they exhibit? In daily life, how would they handle that traffic jam that always drives me crazy? How would they deal with that chaotic relationship with my boss at work? What is the standard of a human being that I dream of? What does it mean to be a true human being? How does such a person respond to life? What do they seek to develop throughout their life? This is the human identity we must envision. Beyond the trends of fashion, we must be able to visualize this. And once we discover human identity and move toward it, we naturally elevate life, just as plants fulfill their nature by striving to be plants, not by trying to be animals. Each being fulfills itself by striving to become what it was conceived to be, by finding its rightful place. This is said to be the sanctification of life. It is the act of giving meaning. When each thing finds its place in time, in space, in the universe, it becomes a piece that has found its role within the greater mechanism. It contributes to the whole and, at the same time, fulfills itself. It is important for us to understand this. This is a quote from the book I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, a book called Seeking Wisdom, which this lecture is based on, by a thinker named Sri Ram. He says this, and I find it very beautiful: when there is a state of mind and heart that does not depend on anything external for its fulfillment, we discover within ourselves the security, joy, and peace that we often seek outside. In other words, when we find the human identity within ourselves, circumstances no longer define us. Circumstances will play their role, and I will know how to respond to them as a human being. Whatever the circumstances may bring, I will respond as a person. Therefore, I will live the life of a person, have the thoughts of a person, and feel the emotions of a person. Whatever life may do to me, it will not make me behave like an animal. It will not degrade me. Recently, I gave a lecture here on beauty, according to a thinker named Roger Scruton. It was quite interesting. He has a very compelling body of work. He quotes a passage from Kant, where Kant speaks about this topic. When we look at the more sublime aspects of nature, the ocean, the alpine peaks, those grand and majestic things, we may at first feel intimidated and think about how small we are. But soon after, there is a reaction within us. We realize that, just as those things have their own dignity, which lies in being what they are, we too have our dignity, which lies in being what we are. And when we are deeply human, we possess something that no one can take away from us. In other words, that ocean, those alpine peaks, they may be able to kill me, but they cannot corrupt me. Do you see? And in that, humanity finds its greatness. No one can take away from me what I am. They may destroy me physically, but they cannot corrupt me. And in that sense, the human being is as grand as the ocean or the alpine peaks, when he finds that which corresponds to him within the order of nature, his identity, and he becomes defined by what circumstances can actually do to him. Circumstances cannot dictate who he is. They may even destroy him physically, but as for what he is or ceases to be, no, they cannot reach that. Therefore, their power over the human being is limited. He no longer depends on circumstances. And it is interesting because, in a historical moment where it's so rare for human beings to find that role, a man who becomes individualized, he becomes the only variable. I don't know if you are familiar with the scientific principle that people refer to as ceteris paribus. What does that mean? When I have a variable whose behavior I want to examine, I keep all other circumstances constant, so I can observe only that variation. You realize that a man who is awakened, who truly seeks the human condition, in a world where people are so driven by instincts and passions, and that is so predictable, he becomes a variable among many constants. Therefore, he can clearly know what the environment will bring to him. That is predictable. But how he will respond to the environment, that is absolutely impossible to predict. He is a being under construction, and therefore, at every moment, he becomes a little better. So, it is no longer a matter of circumstances. The circumstances are constants. It becomes a matter of you. If it worked out, it is you. If it didn't, it is also you. It is your responsibility. It is the theory of responsibility from the Stoic thinkers. Nothing happens to a man that is not proper to man, when he is truly a man. Because otherwise, what happens to man could belong to anything, it's whatever the circumstances dictate. Now, imagine another phrase from a more modern thinker named Jean-Paul Sartre. Hell is other people. He used to say this. Actually, he was mocking a common mindset, even in his time, which still exists today. Hell is other people. Others are always to blame for what happens to us. What I propose to you is to reverse that. Hell is the self. That small self which does not make the effort to know itself and allows itself to be dragged along by circumstances. And if we come to know ourselves, if we take on the challenge of developing a quality human life, we can turn the game around and perhaps say that paradise can also be the self and, as a consequence, others as well. And life as a whole. Simply when I embrace my role as a human Bena choice of quality, of life, that is quite different from what the collective usually offers. Therefore, it requires courage, it requires individuality, it requires knowing yourself. Which is exactly the proposal we offer through philosophy. Human being, know yourself. Find yourself as a human being. And then, fulfill a standard of quality of life for which nature has designed you. Do what corresponds to you within the framework of the universe. Make life sacred. And then you have another possibility, one that is not trendy, not collective. But it is the one for which we were conceived. It is what is expected of us as human beings.